Welcome, everyone. I'm Professor Gina Neff. I run the Minderoo Center for Technology and Democracy at the University of Cambridge. And I'm also Deputy CEO of the UK government's Investment in Responsible AI, called RAI UK. So last month I wrote a provocation. This was early January. I said in that essay, I posed the question, can democracy survive AI? And now after the Paris summit and here at the Munich Security Conference, it's really time to assess where the world is, particularly for this relationship between our systems of government and new and emerging technologies that are creating and posing enormous potential benefits and enormous challenges that we have to face. Global alliances are shifting, as we keep hearing. And new technologies have the power to both strengthen economies and societies or help people attack the fundamental principles of those societies. So top of everyone's mind is how do we support innovation, growth, and from where I'm now in the UK, how do we support productivity? What do we do with balancing innovation and shoring up our societies? What guardrails do we need to have in place? At the Paris AI Summit, Nobel laureate economist Joseph Stiglitz said it, I think, quite well. He said, the pace is greater than our ability to manage the change. So that's the challenge democracies are facing. Are democracies going to be up to the task set before us, humanity's task, of making sure we harness these powerful, potentially transformative tools to benefit and not harm? So joining me today is Henna Virkkunen. She's Executive Vice President for Tech Sovereignty, Security and Democracy at the European Commission. So first for you, Henna. You recently said in an interview, we can't negotiate our values. What is at stake in the debates about AI and democratic values?
Yes, I also see that technologies, they give many opportunities for us, and I see it more positive parts on that. But of course, I think also that we have to be aware of risks. And I have been, last 10 years, I have been especially focusing to digital legislation, and I have to say that as a politician, it has been the, I think, most difficult task to set rules for digital world, because the technology is developing all the time so fast and our decision-making processes are very slowly, and we should, in the same time, we should encourage innovations, but we should also be aware of risks. And I think because of AI, this has become much more difficult than earlier, because now the development is so fast. But in the European Union, we have very much the approach that we want to have the same values in digital world than we have here in our physical world. So it means that we want to make sure that we have a safe and fair and democratic environment also when it comes to our digital environment. And that's why we have set rules, for example, Digital Service Act and AI Act. And the main principle in both is that we have a risk-based approach. So, for example, in digital services, the very large online platforms, which has very much power in our democracies, in our economy, they have more obligations that they have to, for example, assess and mitigate the systematic risks they are posing for our electoral processes, for our civic discourse, for our well-being, for example. So all the online platforms, they have to have their own processes in place, that how they are mitigating and assessing themselves the risks. And also, the same comes to AI. So we have also there a risk-based approach in the European Union. We have banned some of the user cases totally. So the first part of AI Act came into the force now in February, and we have prohibited some user cases totally. For example, you can't do so-called social scoring in the European Union, or you can't monitor the workers' emotions in the working places, for example. and because these are against our human rights and our fundamental values in the European Union. And then also if you are using AI, for example, in healthcare systems or in transportation, there we can see that there's also higher risks. And those products, they have to meet certain standards before they are entering into the markets. And they have to be tested because we want to make sure that we have also certain level of safety in the same time when we also want to encourage innovations in the field of AI. So that's what we are trying to do in the European Union. We are trying to keep also a safe and fair and democratic environment also in digital world. But of course, it's not very easy, as we have seen.
Well, and on that note, we're going to turn to Claudia and some of the challenges that democracies are facing. As you know, 2024 was called the year of AI and elections. We had elections in the European Parliament and around the world. Claudia Plattner is president of the Federal Office for Information Security of Germany. Claudia, I gather there are upcoming elections here in Germany. What tools do we have for shoring up our democracies, and can democracies keep up with the threats?
That is an excellent question, and I wish I could just say that, yeah, sure, no problem. But I guess we are in for a long ride, and it's going to be a tough one. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm very, very optimistic when it comes to technology as well. I'm a tech person, like through and through. So I love coding. I love playing around with AI as well. That's amazing stuff. And I can already see myself being lightened of all those burdens of those administrational things that I need to do. I'm happy to get rid of all of this. At the same time, we're finding ourselves with a technology on our doorstep that really is going to change us in such a fast way that we really have to make sure that we keep up with it. And yes, we can reduce it to, well, a bucket of water can be used to water a plant, no doubt about it. You can also drown someone in it. There it's quite obvious that you want to make sure that, you know, it's forbidden to drown someone in it. That much is for sure. But we also have to make sure that we indeed find the right way of regulation that will not basically hinder us to make the progress that comes with it. And finding this balance is crucial for our democracies. Because if we do not strike it, if we do not get it right, either we lose our democracies because we simply will be overrun by all the technology that comes with it and the bad guys using it. And on the other hand, if we don't manage to keep up innovation, our societies will basically suffer the economic consequences and basically end up in exactly the same place. So we have to get this balance right, which is very, very difficult. And on this one, for me, it depends on how fast do we learn to evolve. So as far as the current AI regulation is concerned, I would want us to be working on the version 1.2 already. Because we will need it, that much is for sure. And we will have to adjust, we will have to find out what we got right and what we got wrong. There will be things that we will learn, and we need to learn to adjust faster to it. So if I had a wish when it comes to making sure that we get it right, that we strike the right balance, it would be to become faster. And that means let's start to work on version 1.2, and also be willing to throw out some of the things that we found were not working. Let's start to be honest about this, and get the regulation that we really need without losing the innovation, but also protecting ourselves.
Well, that balance of getting things right in a rapidly changing world is a great moment to turn to Kent. Kent Walker is president for global affairs at Google. He's also member of the Security Innovation Board here at the Munich Security Conference. And Kent, I'm going to pose a question to you that you recently asked yourself at the Halifax conference. How do we align the work of democracies with the private sector? Just a small question.
But an extraordinarily important one. I share Claudia's optimism about the progress of technology. I think if we look around us, we face many challenges, but on the longer term, technology over the last century has doubled human lifespans, improved healthcare, improved the lives of people around the world in dramatic ways. But we also, as Claudia noted, as the Commissioner pointed out, have to make sure that we are innovating within frameworks, guardrails, to address the potential abuses and misuses that any technology brings with it. In the case of AI, I think there's wide agreement about the risks of deepfakes or child sexual abuse material and the like. How do we find consensus and frameworks to make that work well? We have long said that AI is too important to regulate and too important not to regulate well. Again, as the Commissioner was pointing out, if it's illegal offline, it should probably be illegal online. If it's illegal without AI, it probably should be illegal with AI. So how do we draw on the learnings that we have developed over the years in many different sectors and import those into the digital space, into the new challenges we're facing with AI? But if we can align those incentives, the companies, responsible companies who want to provide high quality products, who value their reputation, who want to do the right thing to comply with the law and to make sure that they have trustworthy products, will have some incentive to move in the right direction and participate in the shaping of the evolving dynamic digital regulation that you've both talked about. Because it is challenging. There's nothing harder than regulating a fast-moving new technology. There's a famous line from a book called The Social Control of Technology, written in the 80s, now called Collingridge's Dilemma. That it's possible to regulate a technology too soon and regulate it too late. Too late and it's baked in, too soon and you don't really understand what you're doing. So you need a sort of nimbleness in the regulatory process to make sure you're getting it right.
I'm going to stick with you for just a moment, Kent, because we just had Vice President J.D. Vance give a speech that outlined a quite different view of information integrity than might be held by the European Commission and other, the EU and other jurisdictions around the world. And I just, coming back to the Paris AI Summit, Joseph Stiglitz and others argued, Stiglitz said, quote, "We can't rely on the US, especially now, to put forward the kind of guardrails the world needs for AI." What would you say to those critics?
Well, I think each country is going to formulate its own regulations, as they always have, with regard to the internet and other technologies, to make sure that they're reflecting their own cultural values, as you were saying earlier. And that's important for multinational companies and for domestic companies to make sure we're finding ways to comply with those different rules of the road in different environments. Where we can, we are urging as much international consensus as possible. And there has been a lot of good work done through Munich Security Conference, the G7, the OECD, the United Nations, etc., to try and create overarching frameworks, to try and progress some of this work. Even in the private sector, there have been ISO, the standard setting organization, ML Commons, Frontier Model Forum. There was a lot of good work being done, which we hope will ultimately inform the work of nation states as they formulate their own laws.
That's a great moment to bring in Amba. Amba, you've been a part of the conversations as a delegate to the summits, official delegate to the summits of the AI Safety Summits, AI Action Summits. Amba Kak is co-executive director of the AI Now Institute. After Paris, the burning question I have is, are democracies safer?
Are democracies safer? I mean, I think Paris, and you were there as well, Gina, only underscored what we already know, which is that there are immense, in some ways unprecedented headwinds today against any kind of new regulation, but also against enforcement of existing regulation, particularly against the US tech industry. What we haven't gotten very good at doing is naming the reasons why. And so, the takeaway from the super election year of 2024 shouldn't be that, oh, I think we, may have overblown or overestimated the AI disinformation threat. It's that maybe we were missing or we seriously underestimated the real existential threat to democracy, and that is the super concentration of power in very few private technology companies at a time when, they already, as we've been discussing for about a decade now, control the infrastructures on which public discourse happens. We're at an inflection point where the very same companies are sort of poised to dominate, even eclipse this new era of technology, whether through control of the infrastructures, but also through control over access to monetizable markets and access to the consumer. So, bear with me only because I do think that this sort of understanding that big tech and its concentrated power has a relationship to our information crises is today well understood. It kind of cuts across ideological lines, but somehow I think we don't always port that same analysis to the AI field. And I think that is a mistake, not only because much of the current paradigm of AI only builds a lot sort of upon that concentration, whether it is infrastructure monopolies, whether it is data monopolies, whether it is platform or device monopolies. These are the ingredients that today determine success in the AI race. So I guess I want to sort of take the moment to name the problem, but also to ask ourselves, why is it a problem? Why is it a problem if more AI equals more concentration, and why is it a problem for democracy? Tech oligarchy, thanks to former President Biden, is now a term that's back in vogue, but it's not a new idea. It was the US military office that towards the end of World War II actually announced a special decartelization office because they were concerned that it was economic concentration that in many serious ways contributed to the rise of authoritarianism in Germany. And I do think that, for those who are within the national security community today, I think it's an important sort of, cautionary tale to begin with, especially at a time when whether it is the big tech giants or it is the new startup giants that are backed by big tech like OpenAI, their message is very clear. Their continued hegemony is being presented as a national security imperative, even a global security imperative. And our research sort of challenges that premise and argues that this kind of ultra-concentrated power is a threat to democracy. It's also a threat to our collective security. And I feel like we should start there.
So one of my colleagues has the term Pax Technica, right? That there has been a tacit agreement for liberal democracy, for technologies that support liberal democracies, freedom of expression, protection of intellectual property, and a pro-capitalism, right? And that this Pax, this American-led Pax, has held through the creation of the commercial internet. And now we see perhaps a change in that, right? An American-first approach may actually have real implications for how the rest of the world understands American tech power. Where do we go from here? What does this tendency of tech companies saying, trust us, don't regulate us, mean in a rapidly changing geopolitical climate? Any of you can jump in on that. Yes, please, Henna.
In the European Union, we are in good situation because we have already very powerful tools. Digital Service Act, also Digital Market Act, and now AI Act is also coming into the force. And so we already saw it many years ago that these very large online platforms especially, that they are so powerful when it comes to our societies, to our democratic discourse, also to our economies, that they can't run only under their own terms and conditions. So we have to have certain rules also for them. And the main principle is really, like it was said here, for example, that everything what is illegal in our societies in the European Union, it's also illegal online. So they have to take all the illegal products and content down. And also, they have to themselves have the systems in the place that how they are mitigating and assessing the systematic risks they are posing for our well-being, for our democracies, for our civic discourse, for our electoral processes, for protection of minors, what is one big problem, I think, worldwide. When I'm meeting my counterparts all over the world, everybody is now saying about the protection of minors if they don't have rules for that. It's something that often the online platforms are not taking care at all, we can say. And then also we have rules about transparency, because it's also important that the people, they know that why certain content is visible for them, and they have to have also choice for this, that what kind of content is shown for them. So we have many rules about transparency, so-called housekeeping rules for those online platforms, and we are enforcing them. We are currently having investigations against, we can say, all these big social online platforms, and also against big online shopping platforms currently. But then also, in the same time, we are also working with the guidelines. Last year, we published guidelines on electoral processes, and now we are working guidelines on protection of minors. So we try to also give support for those online platforms. That's what we are expecting. And also we have so-called code of conduct against hate speech, and all the big online platforms, they were signing that. So they are committed in the European Union that they are acting against hate speech in the European Union. And also now we have a code of conduct against disinformation, and nearly all of the platforms are also signing this. So we have also these voluntary measures. In the same time, we are also enforcing our rules. So I think we have strong rules here in the European Union, and we are in good position. But of course, all the time we have to follow also the technological developments, especially now, of course, AI. It's also giving new challenges also for that. But in the same time, already the platforms, they have to all the time assess and mitigate the risks, and also this covers, of course, the AI.
Claudia. Maybe answering a little bit to what you've said and trying to combine it with regulation, which at first glance might not even be that simple, because you're basically talking about a third world order. So if it's about, it used to be the traditional two, like economic power and military power. And all of a sudden we find ourselves in a situation where we have a third world order or a third power, which is tech. And tech has a very interesting effect on the other two. Basically, it enlarges the intersection between the two. As in, they all of a sudden find themselves with a common denominator, which is tech. You need, if you want to talk about AI, you need to know AI to be able to build drones. At the same time, you need AI to be able to optimize your business processes, because that's what's making you more powerful economically. So all of a sudden, the denominator between the two gets larger, and it's tech. It's about knowing tech and being able to handle it. And it's influencing the world in such a rapid way, and we are basically just looking at it like, wow, what's happening? And the question is really, who will end up with the biggest part of the power? And China has a very clear idea that they want to be the ones. The US definitely has a lot of that digital power which is out there. Russia, we will see about that. More in the traditional powers. So where does this leave us in Europe? And whether we regulate, that's one thing, which I wholeheartedly subscribe to. I might not always like it, but I see it's necessary, so I'm there. On the other hand, how is that going to help us in the distribution of power? For us, really, the only way forward can and must be understanding tech and starting to use it. Trying to make sure that we get some of this power also here on our shores, because otherwise, other parts of the world will just basically distribute it among them. And we have just over the course of the last weeks learned that it's not just one power that's going to use it in whatever way they see fit. It's now at least two. And this is, as far as I'm concerned, what we have to look into, and why we have to really beef up our tech skills. And in addition to regulation, I see our biggest way forward really here. And here we have to partner up with everyone or anyone who's willing to do so in order to get better at it. I've just written an article about it, which has been published in the newspaper just yesterday. That's a coincidence. So.
Before I bring Amba back in and give Kent a chance to jump in, I'm going to cue your questions. So get your questions ready. Be thinking about what you want to ask our panel. Amba.
I love what, Claudia, what you said, because it's a reminder that we need to regulate, but we also need to build. But I think it is important to try to, I think, push forward regulation that is in service of a sovereignty and a build agenda. And I don't know that we are as well served, spending all of our attention on the more traditional levers of regulation that a lot of us have mentioned today, versus more sort of structural interventions. I spent 2 years at the Federal Trade Commission under Chair Khan. And the effort there was to try to address this market structurally, to think about what were the levers that would create a more level playing field, create the conditions for build to happen, and for build to happen in a way that could actually contest and challenge structural power. So, that legacy, her legacy is one that has been embraced across party lines, across ideological lines. And I think there's a message there, which is when you regulate competition or any other kind of regulation, not from, a kind of a basis of political ideology or from concerns of free speech or censorship, but much more sort of identifying a problem that cuts across, which is kind of undue concentration of economic power. So treat the disease and not just the symptoms.
Kent.
We've spoken a lot about the country perspective and the importance of regulation. I think it's also important to add to the conversation that some of the transnational perspective on this, the scientific breakthroughs that really are a rising tide that benefits all boats. We were proud to have 3 of the engineers who are working at Google win the Nobel Prize in the last couple of months. We're seeing extraordinary benefits in healthcare already, work against malaria, Alzheimer's, personalized medicine. AI is advancing quantum science research at remarkable rates. We're seeing breakthroughs in material science, which I think will add to progress in sustainability, energy production, and more. So keeping that balance in mind, making sure that whatever framework individual countries end up with, that we as a global community have a shared stake in scientific progress. And that's the astonishing thing about AI. It's not just a scientific breakthrough. It's a breakthrough in how we make scientific breakthroughs. It's an invention for creating inventions. And that's really quite remarkable. And we find ourselves at what we call in Germany, a Wendepunkt, a turning point. And being able to take advantage of that opportunity, I think is critical, even as we make sure we create safeguards against, for deployers and users, misusing these tools, as any technology can be misused.
Henna, and then I'm going to bring our first question in.
Yeah, I would like to come back to this market power also, that because we have in digital world, of course, we have few very big companies which are globally huge, as we know, and it's very difficult for the smaller players enter into the markets, and it's not good for innovations also when some players are so huge that the smaller players can't get any space in the markets. And that's why we have also in the European Union we have the Digital Markets Act, what is about competition policy, and it's especially meant for that we want to create level playing field and fair competition, and also give possibilities for the SMEs and startups and for the smaller companies and also for their products in the markets. And it's also new legislation we are now enforcing, but we have seen that many parts of the world, they are very much following now that, because they also see that they would like to also have more players in the market. It's of course important for innovations, but also I think for the democracy and economy as a whole.
And with that, we'll turn to our Munich young leader to ask the first question. Sun Chin Hao is head and fellow of the US-EU program at the Center for International Security and Strategy at Tsinghua University in Beijing.
Thank you very much for your excellent and insightful views on this topic. My question is, with AI-driven disinformation becoming a global issue, do you see any feasible pathways or suggestions for international cooperation in addressing this issue? And what role should multilateral institutions or tech companies could play in setting global norms? Thank you.
Claudia?
Okay, I get to go first? Okay, thank you. As you pointed out, we have another election coming up, which is next Sunday. After that, I will have a lot of time, or at least a lot more time to think about this. But I do see us having to do a little bit more about this whole topic of disinformation. This is clearly not working. So we have come up with regulations there in order to address some of the companies that are involved. No doubt about it. Chances are we might even have to go beyond that. And the first thing I really like to introduce, if it were up to me, I'm not the policymakers, but if I got to choose, then what I would really want to do is, first of all, provide some transparency. And the first thing I'm thinking about here is social media, of course. Let's start with something very simple. Social media is for humans. maybe also for organizations, but it's not for bots. Bots don't need to be social. So let's start with something very simple. You have to be a human or an enterprise in order to be able to come up with an account. Next thing, if you put something there that is by AI, it has to be marked and clearly visible as artificially created. And at the same time, provide, please, a possibility for people to actually see that this has been signed. That's a message by our chancellor, by our commissioner, by whomever, and they sign it basically saying, this is mine. Technology-wise, from a crypto point of view, this is peanuts. Not a problem at all. But we do need, of course, a partnership with you guys, for example, in making sure that we can actually see this has been signed, this has been identified as fake. And then you leave, I have one or two more. Then you have a part in the middle where you don't really know. So you authenticate the authentic, identify the fake, and then you have a part that you don't know. And here it's where it gets interesting. Let's do the next thing. If you're a human, then whatever you post on social media is an opinion. Let's please write opinion on top. If you're an organization like an enterprise, then whatever you post there is a statement. You're legally bound by what you say. So let's please make this a statement that you have to take responsibility for. And last but not least, if you're someone who's getting paid to actually post something, let's make sure that, again, you actually have to identify that and have the platforms actually show us that, indeed, this has been paid content. We will most likely not be able to enforce it all over the place immediately, but it would at least give us a legal handle to actually look into things. So those would be a few of the things that I think could be wonderful additions to the DSA that we currently have, and that must come to full fruit. It still has to work, it has to be developed. But those would be a few things that wouldn't cost anyone any civil rights at all. It's all just about transparency. It's really just transparency for the citizens. And I'd say that's really not too much to ask.
Kent, I saw you being animated. And I wonder if it's around these frameworks of thinking about content versus how we're going into new AI models.
No, I think it's an extraordinarily important area of work, and there's more and more research being done about the actual impact of different types of approaches here. There's a risk of going to assumptions without really testing how they play out in the real world. So we've done a lot of work with regard to asserted provenance, things like watermarking, fingerprinting, metadata incorporation, etc., which plays an important part. A complementary element is context. So tools like about this image or about this result in Google search or about this ad, which allow you, the viewer, to contextualize information. Because most of the false information we saw coming up about Gaza, for example, was not generated by AI. It was photos of children from entirely different wars a decade ago. So the context and purpose, the who, what, when, why of information, how it's being shared, is extraordinarily important. These false claims are hardly a new thing. You can make false claims with a typewriter or with Photoshop or simply with a picture taken out of context. And in fact, there is a risk of conflating the two, that something created with AI may or may not be true or false. Something created not with AI may or may not be true or false. Sometimes those two questions align. Sometimes they don't. There is interesting research about the implied truth effect. If you start labeling AI-generated content, people tend to assume that the non-labeled content is true, even though there may not be an association between those things. So I think it's an extraordinarily important and data-dependent question where we need collectively to do more research as we think about how best to improve trustworthiness, which I think is the shared goal here.
I'm going to always wave the flag for research. Do we have the mic? There's a question in the front, and I'll bring Henna in. And then I've got another question.
Yeah, because I see that it's important that we as regulators and decision makers, that we are working very closely also with the stakeholders here when we are looking at what could be the right tools to avoid spreading of disinformation. And I think, for example, this code of conduct, it's very important exercise in the European side, because about 40 digital services providers are signatories on that, that they are committed to different actions, that how they are making sure that they are not spreading disinformation in their services. But I also see that transparency is very much also the key, that also the user can see that it's clearly labeled what is made on AI, and also the sources are listed when AI is used for certain content. So I see that this is very important. But always, I want to underline when we speak about technology and democracy, that we have to also invest into the people. So our citizens' education, their digital skills, they are crucial, because the world is more and more complex, and to give also tools for the citizens that they know how digital world is working, and they have the tools to analyze and think critically. So I think it's also very important we shouldn't forget that, the citizens' part.
I'm going to take two questions. I have one here in the front, and then I have here, second row.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ali. I'm from Canada. I currently am Chief of Staff to the Senior Advisor to the Prime Minister on Foreign and Defence Policy. In a previous role, I was one of the founders of the Global Partnership on AI, which Canada and France led. I'm also taking part as a Munich Young Leader this year. As Canada takes on the G7 presidency, and this was mentioned by the Prime Minister a couple days ago at the AI Action Summit, what advice would you give to Canada as President of the G7 to help sort of convene and advance the discussion on AI?
Great. So advancing the discussion through the G7, and we have another question here, and then we'll answer those, and then I'll take the next round if we have time.
Hi, my name is Nathalie Loiseau, and I'm a member of the European Parliament. We were colleagues before, Commissioner. I heard you saying how important all regulations are, among them the DSA. And I know you mean it because you voted for it, as I voted for it. And now we want to see it enforced. And we saw a strong push from American tech against the DSA. We know that the Commission launched 2 different investigations recently, and I would like to know what's the timetable to expect to have results of these investigations and action as well, because there's no use of working for years on regulations if we don't do what we have to do afterwards. And you also mentioned the code of practice against disinformation. We are seeing a number of platforms trying a U-turn, saying that they are not interested anymore in fact-checking, that this is not how freedom of expression, so-called freedom of expression, because it's freedom to attack, freedom to lie, freedom to manipulate, should be protected. And on this, I would like to hear what you have to say in Google, because now I have the feeling that I had very different tone a few years ago to the ones that we are hearing today, and it doesn't sound rosy, and it sounds that some tech companies and the US government are willing to pressure us to change our minds, to change our societies, to change our democracies, or lecturing us on our democracies like Vice President Vance, they are doing today, which was for me outrageous. Thank you.
And perhaps very briefly, we'll get the third question in the back, and then I'll turn it over to our panel.
Hello, I have a background in computer science, software development, and so in recent days or weeks, I've noticed some more advances with agentic AI being able to do my job. So before I even had to look at the software and copy it, but now in recent days, I just have to push OK, and it does everything by itself. So my question is, when soon this replaces so many jobs, what will that do to democracy, and what are we doing to make sure this doesn't have a bad effect on democracy? Like, I don't know, in the 1930s, right, there was lots of job loss, and that had created lots of problems, right?
Thank you. So, just in the last 5 minutes together on this panel, let's solve what G7 is going to do, how the EU can enforce the DSA and the EU AI Act, and what we're going to do about jobs. Who wants to start?
I can go very quickly, maybe sort of reacting to what we just heard, I think the biggest success for the G7 could be to sort of reverse what you just mentioned, which is that regulation has become a dirty word. In some ways, I think what we saw in Paris last week was walking back progress that we've made over the last decade, and tech companies have very successfully been able to push through the narrative that any curbs on their continued hegemony is equivalent to pushing China ahead. This is a very dangerous, it's a very self-serving narrative. It's one that hurts citizens, it's one that hurts workers. In fact, Vice President Vance's speech at the France summit, what was less reported by the media was that he started by saying, or somewhere in the speech, he said, we need a pro-worker AI agenda. And I thought that was really interesting, because what are the kinds of guardrails or the institutional setups that will ensure that we have a pro-worker AI paradigm, right? So I think we need to not lose sight of the fact that if we are going to, commit to an AI trajectory that is accountable to any values, to any humanist values, then we do need, regulation needs to be a part of that picture. And I hope that the G7 can reinforce that.
I too will try and cover all three quickly. I think the G7 work around the Hiroshima AI process has been exemplary in terms of starting to set international frameworks around this, and I would urge Canada to continue that work, as well as the GPI, the Partnership on AI. There are a number of really excellent work streams underway, so I think that would be great. With regard to the general notion of authoritative information online, we have always been focused on using the signals that we get in Google search to provide relevant, useful, helpful information, and our commitment to that is unwavering. Our founding mission statement is organizing the world's information and making it universally accessible and useful, and we're very committed to that. It is core to our business and core to our philosophy. And then finally, with regard to the question of AI displacement, there's always some degree of displacement with any new technology. That's not to take that lightly. We have to very much focus on upskilling, reskilling, helping workers transition. But it's also important to remember that 60% of the jobs we have today didn't exist 80 years ago. We are in continually reinvention, in a mode of continual reinvention. John Maynard Keynes in the 20s said that by the end of the 20th century, we would be working 10-hour weeks. And he was right if we were satisfied with 1920s levels of consumption. But we're not. We want far more. And those aspirations have actually kept us all employed in these new generation of jobs. So various studies from McKinsey and others have suggested that maybe 5–10% of jobs will transition away. Maybe 60% of jobs will become more productive through the use of these tools. And how do we help people as a society, as in individual companies, as communities, make sure that they become more productive, more artistic, more creative, as Claudia was saying at the beginning, avoiding the mundane administrative tasks to free them up to do more creative and productive things.
Henna, Claudia, final words?
Yeah, first of all, to our colleague here from Canada, AI is already on the agenda for the next G7. Specifically, we're going to talk about AI bomb, which is a piece of technology that we're going to look into further, and this has to do with cybersecurity. So it already is on the agenda. Just keep it on there, so then I'd be happy. As for the software part, I used to be a software developer, love it still. I've looked into what kind of code you actually get from all those modern engines, and they are all about pattern recognition and pattern recreation. And they're statistically. So that means they're looking towards how does the majority of coders solve a problem. The majority of code that is out there is really bad. So you're going to get really bad code if you just do that. There will, as far as I can see, for the foreseeable future, there will be a role for software developers just in making sure that what they actually implement or is implemented has the right kind of quality and not the average kind of quality, because that's simply not good enough. And it won't be secure anyhow. So there's room for you. And last but not least, all I can say is, yes, I found it outrageous too.
And just a very short intervention, if I could, to come back on your coding point. 25% of the software code written at Google is now written in the first instance by AI. But we haven't laid off our AI engineers. We've actually expanded the scope of what they're doing. So I think there is hope for humanity.
As long as the tech workers still have jobs.
Yeah. And final word?
Yeah, digital rules, what we have in the European Union, we are fully enforcing them. And when it comes to DSA, there's 10 investigations going on. And when enough evidence is collected, then we can close the investigations, and that work is going on all the time. But also investigations are not the only way how we are enforcing the rules, of course, because we have all the time dialogue going on. We have these guidelines, code of practice, and also last year all the online platforms, first time they carried out their own independent audits, and the auditors were also giving recommendations now what they should do better. So there's several fields where we are working to enforce these rules. And when it comes to AI, some researchers are really saying, then developers, that in few years' time, AI will do everything better than we as human beings are doing. So, of course, we have to prepare for that, our societies and our economy. And also, if AI will be very soon the operating system of our economies and of our society, of course, there's also many risks. So I think this is for G7, something that I think it's important to discuss that in the global level also. We have to discuss about the safety of AI also and certain global rules also in this area. I know that now in the many countries, the idea is that we shouldn't regulate at all to encourage innovations, but there's also certain risk, and I think those countries has to come back, I think, very soon for that also, and look also that some rules are needed.
That's a note for us to underscore and say when we gather here again next year, we will be able to assess how we've done and where we're going. I don't think these conversations are going to stop between now and then. So thank you all for joining us, and join me in welcoming and thanking our panel.